signed the routing slip at 2,147 hours, and handed it to her across the table, without looking up. That is the part I have never been able to put down. Not the colonel's words. Not the laughter from the staff around the tent. Just the sound of the paper leaving my hand, taking it without a word, and me not looking up. Lieutenant Farron had made the assignment in about 30 seconds. The Darrow Road network south of Harwell Station had been dark for 6 hours. Both crossings out, the relay post at Kessin gone silent, and a battalion of 340 men staged at Fob Ardell, set to begin their advance at 0530 on orders that were now wrong. New intelligence had come in an hour before. The Ardell advance route was covered. If those men moved at 0530 on the existing orders, they were moving into a prepared kill zone. The abort had to reach Ardell's commanding officer by hand. No signal traffic. The frequency was compromised, and it had to arrive before stand to. Farron had looked around the tent. 3 of his couriers were forward of the blackout line. 1 was on a medical hold. His driver had a vehicle but no route. Then his aide had mentioned the specialist attached to the logistics element. The one who had ridden in with the resupply column. The one Farron had spent the previous 2 days routing around, because she was, in his words, taking up space on his manifest. Name was on no briefing roster. She had no desk in the operations tent. She'd been eating her meal at the far end of the logist bench, and running her own equipment checks, alone, on the vehicle line every morning, and none of us had asked her a single question about why she was there or who had sent her. Farron had pulled the abort order off the printer and held it up without looking at it. "One-way errand for someone we can afford to lose," he said, and the men nearest him laughed, and he dropped the packet on my side of the table. "Captain, get it to whoever that is." I had carried it to her. She was at the vehicle line, with her kit half assembled, and she read the routing once, folded it, and put it in the interior pocket of her jacket. She asked me one question, the deadline, not the distance. I told her 5 through stand to. She nodded and asked if there was anything else. I said no. I signed the slip. I did not tell her what Farron had said. I walked back to the tent, and I sat down at the radio table, and I did not think about it. Again for almost 2 hours. The first thing that made me think about it was the Kessin feed going fully dead at 2300. Not static, dead. Our forward observer south of the crossing had been sending a broken position report every 40 minutes. At 2300, it stopped entirely. The road south of Kessin was the only ground route to Ardell. I pulled the route sheet and measured the distance. 11.3 miles from our wire to the Ardell command post, with Kessin crossing at the midpoint, and a second blown culvert at the Darrow Fork, 2 miles past it. The terrain between the 2 crossings was a dry canal bed, exposed, no cover, the kind of ground an infantry unit would use for an interdiction corridor, because it was the only way through. I told myself she had turned back when the feed went dark. I told myself she had read the ground and made the correct tactical choice and was at that moment sitting in a culvert short of Kessin waiting for first light. A reasonable person would have turned back. I kept the radio volume up and worked the rest of the traffic, and did not let myself calculate what it would mean for the men at Ardell if the abort did not arrive. At 0130, one of the forward observers on the ridge above the canal bed reported movement south of Kessin. Single figure, moving fast, no visible weapon raised. I asked him to confirm. He confirmed. I marked the position on the route sheet. It put her past the first crossing. 0340, our Darrow Fork relay, the one we had assumed destroyed, came back on air for 90 seconds. No voice traffic, just a carrier signal, then silence. I put my pen down. If she had reached the relay and gotten it running long enough to confirm the frequency was live, she was past the fork. She was in the last 2 miles. She was going to make it, or she had already been stopped. And there was nothing between those 2 facts that I could affect by sitting at the table. Farron came into the tent at 0430 for the pre-dawn brief. He looked at the route sheet on my table and asked if we had any traffic from Ardell confirming receipt. I told him no. He told me to mark it as a probable failed delivery and begin drafting a contingency. And I started writing and said nothing, and he moved on to the next item, and the tent continued. She walked through the Harwell wire at 0512. I did not see her come in. The first I knew of it was the Ardell duty officer's voice on the command net at 051. Calm, flat, precise. Confirmed receipt of abort order. Battalion standing down. Request authentication of routing source. I had the authentication ready because I had spent the night staring at the routing slip I had signed. I gave it. The duty officer read it back, and then he said one other thing, and the tent went quiet. He said, the courier had identified herself on arrival by call sign per attachment protocol, and he needed to confirm whether we had full attachment on file, because the packet she was carrying had a classified annex they had not been cleared to open without verification. He read the call sign. Lone circuit. Farron looked up from his map. His aide pulled the attachment from the mission file. It had been clipped beneath the abort order the entire time. The full personnel file, flagged for commanding officer eyes on delivery, which was why it had been sealed. Farron's aide read it quietly for a moment, then handed it to the colonel without saying anything. I watched Farron read it. He stood with the papers in his hands, and he read it the way a man reads something he does not want to be true. 74 kilometers, 19 hours, unassisted classified theater. That was the branch record she held, the longest confirmed solo route run under fire in the past. Logged 2 deployments back in a theater we had all served in, and none of us had been told about, because it was above our clearance. 11. Confirmed solo deliveries under interdiction conditions, a citation from a commanding general, whose name I recognized. Call sign lone circuit given to her not by a unit, but by the general himself in writing, in the citation. The file was 22 pages. Farron read 4 of them and stopped. At 0530 the formation stood. 340 men who were supposed to have stepped off into a prepared ambush were instead standing on the Ardell parade ground alive. And she was standing at the front of the formation because Ardell's commanding officer had placed her there, and Farron was standing at the edge of the Harwell wire, with the papers still in his hand, and he looked at her across the distance of the morning, and he rendered a formal salute. She did not perform it. She received it. She came to attention and held it until he dropped his hand, and then she stood at ease, and she did not look at him again. I kept the routing slip. I still have it. My signature on the bottom, the timestamp 2147, the route marked Harwell to Ardell via Kesson and Darrow Fork, the word delivered, written across it in her hand at 0512 in ink that was still faintly dark from where she had been wet. I have read it more times than I can count, and what I come back to is not the ink or the time or even the distance. It is the question she asked me at the vehicle line. The deadline, not the distance. She already knew the distance. She had known it before I handed her the paper. She only needed to know how much of the night she had.